The priest met his friend, the rabbi, and says to him, "You have taught me many things, but there's one thing in particular I want to learn, but you've always refused to teach me. I again am asking you, please teach me the Talmud." The rabbi replied, "To learn the Talmud, you need to have a Yiddish kop. You need to have a Jewish mind. There's no chance you will succeed in understanding the Talmud." So the priest said to him, "I really find that very insulting and prejudicial." And he kept nagging, and he said to him, "There's no difference in mind." He says, "Okay, fine. I'll agree to teach you the Talmud on condition you can answer this one question." The priest agreed and asked the rabbi, "What is the question?" The rabbi said to the priest, "Listen, guys, this is genius. 2 men fall down through the chimney. One comes out dirty and the other comes out clean. Who of those 2 goes to wash himself, and why?" So, very simple, the priest replied. "The one who's dirty goes to wash, but the one who's clean does not go to wash." The rabbi then said to the priest, "I told you will not succeed in understanding the Talmud. The exact opposite is true. The clean one looks at the dirty one and thinks that he is also dirty, so he goes to wash. The dirty one, on the other hand, looks at the clean one and thinks he is also clean and therefore does not go to wash." The priest thinks about this and he says to the rabbi, "I didn't think of that. Please ask me another question." He said, all right, I'm not going to knock you out in one strike. Let's go again. The rabbi says to the priest, 2 men fall down through the chimney. One comes out dirty and the other one comes out clean. Who of these is going to wash? So the priest said, that's easy. The clean guy looks at the dirty guy, thinks he's dirty, and goes to wash. And the dirty guy looks to the clean guy and thinks he is clean and doesn't go to wash. The rabbi says to the priest, you're wrong again. I told you wouldn't understand. The clean one looks in the mirror and sees that he is clean and therefore does not go to wash. And the dirty one goes to look in the mirror and sees he's dirty and goes to wash. The priest complains. He said, it's not fair. You didn't say anything about a mirror. The rabbi said, you didn't ask. The priest is grumbling and says, that's not fair. He said, listen, you've got to use your kopia. So, you've got one more strike in your house. All right, the priest said, fine. The 2 men fall through the chimney. One came out dirty and one came out clean. Who went to go wash himself? So the priest said, easy. If there's a mirror, the clean one realizes he's clean and he doesn't. And the dirty one realizes he's dirty and does. But if they're not, they look at each other and the clean one sees the dirty and then goes to wash, and the dirty sees the clean and doesn't. And that's it. Rabbi said, no, you don't get this Gemara at all. He said, why not? He said, how's it possible that one can come out the chimney clean and the other one dirty?
That's very clever. Yeah. It didn't make sense to me, actually. It didn't make sense at all.
So I'm going to send a new link here.
All right. Stop.
Cheers, guys.
Recording, but I can't.
Okay. Kiva Brett's joining us. Just give me 1 second. One sec, guys. Akiva. Akivs?
Yeah.
How's it? How are you?
I know.
Good. Are you at work?
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear us? I'm battling to hear you a little bit. Akiva? Akiva? Guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, you clear.
We can't hear him either.
Akiva, we can't hear you.
He could be in the basement somewhere.
I don't know. I can't hear Akiva. All right, guys, let's get started. Yeah. Now, I wanted to ask you last time, should I test you or should I leave testing you?
Let's see. We might know.
All right. What is the case?
Give us the questions first, and then we'll let you know whether you can test us.
That's very funny. All right. So quickly, with regards to, In fact, let me just do a 1-minute summary just to save a little bit of time. I don't know where Akiva's gone. All right. So, there was a Chiddush that was teaching us that the Gemara was basically saying, why isn't the Bryce adjusted to showing the difference between a law of liability and non-liability, the distinction? What's the law of liability? If you've got a beam in the public domain and you just stop to look at smell the roses and look around and stop without notification, in that case, you are liable for damage that you cause. And it said if the load is heavy and you have to adjust it on the shoulder, it was first implied that you're liable because of your failure to warn. And we're saying, well, what is the case if you didn't warn? And the reality is you're not liable. So we're saying, well, then why don't you make that distinction in the brisa instead of talking about this case of warning? So what came out of there was a very, very clear understanding that even if you're doing something you're not supposed to in the public thoroughfare, like actually just stopping to look around, when you stop, you get off the hook if you actually give a warning. In other words, as long as the one behind you is notified in due course, Kevin, as long as the one behind is notified in due course, then you can do something you shouldn't do something that's inappropriate, but if you do, you get off the hook. Okay. Because remember that rule in the public domain, if you have two animals and the one animal acts inadvertently, the second animal that responds inadvertently to that action in an obtuse manner is not liable. What are we talking about? If somebody comes to shout at your wife and you knock their teeth out, I think the court will find you a lot more mitigating than if he's just asking her for a question in terms of directions. Are you with me? So if somebody else acts not inadvertently, sorry guys, inappropriately, then the one who reacts to that inappropriate behavior, it's not deemed that he's always off the hook, but there's certainly mitigating circumstance. But certainly when it comes to an animal, that if the animal in front acts inappropriately, the animal behind reacts to the first animal, the animal behind is not responsible because who behaved abnormally to start with? So same thing with people in the public thoroughfare. If you're adjusting a beam because it's heavy, that's normal because otherwise it's going to hurt your shoulder or slip off. But when you're just stopping when there's a heavy flow, then it's different. So what do we compare this to? If you look at a car on the road, and that car on the road feels its load coming off slightly. You know what I mean? You can feel something's loose, and you indicate your hazard lights to slow down. In that case, you've given some sort of a warning. So to hear the Bryce is turning around and saying that if you did give a warning, even if you did something completely inappropriate, but just stopping in the public domain, you're off the hook, you're not liable. So that was the chiddush between liability and non-liability. Now, we had the same thing. What is this about if one fell and the other one fell behind him? We said that, look, if he didn't have a chance to get up because he was injured, okay, so he's not liable. And if he did have a chance to get up and he did get up, then in that particular case, there wouldn't be any issue. So then it discerns between, well, is there liability because it's an unavoidable mishap for falling? Or is it a case that he didn't get up because he was injured? So we're saying that in that particular issue, where you weren't able to get up in time, you're not liable. But if you were able to get up in time, you are liable. But what we're saying, the chiddush here, is that if you were able to get up in time, but you just felt you needed another minute or two, and the guy behind you say, guys, I'm hurt, just wait, then you're not liable. Does that make sense? So in other words, a warning sends a message that you are going to be delayed or you all need to stop, etc., even if you did something inappropriate in that particular domain. Now, obviously, if you deem it's not an unavoidable mishap like Rabbi Meir falling because it's negligence, in that case, you are liable not because of the injury, but because you fell. But again, if you give a warning, you're off the hook. All right, guys, let's go on, and we're now that we've dealt with liability and non-liability, we're learning something that was taught in the previous brisa, where it says the first potter is liable to damages to the second. and the second is liable for damages to the third. So now the Gemara discusses the extent of each potter's liability, right? So Rava said the first is liable for damages to the second, both in the case of damages caused by his body and in the case of damages caused by his property. So that seems fairly clear, right? In other words, the first one fell. He's responsible now, Kevin, for damages to the second one's body and the second one's property. So that's initially what's put forward there, right? Because his body and his property caused damage. So we're going to analyze this. Right. So, Gavin, what am I trying to say here? Let's just see if you following.
Let somebody else go. I'm just
okay. All right, because I can see there's a slight problem. Arth, you still
there? No, I can't tell you what you said, but I didn't see what was the difference between that and what you said before. So I don't think I heard you correctly. But this is what I did here.
Okay, so no problem.
I'll tell you what I did here. Maybe I'm right. Yeah. I heard you say that if with Rabbi Meir, if somebody falls down, then they if they don't give a warning, then they're culpable, they're liable. If they do give a warning, then it's fine. And then you went on to this new section now where you spoke about that if the guy falls down, he's responsible for both the body, for his bodily injury, and for his property injury. That's what I heard you say.
Okay, so that's exactly it. So what we're saying is we're going on to a new section analyzing this particular Mishnah. So we dealt with culpability, but now what we're going to do is we're going to deal with an issue of lessening culpability, meaning, Gav, that there's three people. The first one injures the second injures the third. So we want to find out what the knock-on effect is, both for if you fall. In other words, if I'm the first person and I fall, and I'm a potter, and I've got a vase, and the ceramic falls, and it shatters, and it's got sharp materials, okay, and it injures somebody else as the first faller. How liable am I to the second person for both the damage I caused? In other words, that I might have fallen on his particular pottery after I slipped back, or alternatively, I fell and injured him because he slipped under me. Or alternatively, my utensil went into his body because it shattered. Or alternatively, my utensil, as I fell, landed on top of his utensil and smashed his utensil. So what we're looking is the amount of liability the first person has compared to the second. So let me just read this carefully. Rava said, the first is liable for damages to the second, both in the case of damages caused by his body and in the case of damages caused by his property. Okay, so my body that causes damage to you as the second faller, and I'm the first faller, I'm responsible for the damages that I cause you in terms of my bodily injury to both you and your property, as well as my utensils that damage you as a human being, as well as your property. That's what we're looking at, is how much is the first potter liable to the second for both the damage he causes and his property. But one thing that you guys have to be aware of is that statement can be ambiguous. What do we mean, Kevin, by ambiguous? We mean
two meanings.
Pardon?
They have more than one meaning.
Exactly. It's not absolutely clear. So if I say to you the first potter is liable for damages to the second, both in the case of damages caused by his body and in the case of damages caused by his property, we have to know the distinction of either, of what it actually means. So let me just go through it with you. So the clarity here, and I've been reading the Rashi and some of the commentaries that the Schottenstein put in terms of Tosfot. The first potter is liable with whether it was his body or his utensils that damaged the second potter. Okay, Arth? Whether it was his body or or utensils that damaged the second potter, the first potter is liable. However, there's an important difference between damage caused by the first person's body and damage caused by his utensils. Okay? A person's body is classified, guys, as what? As mave, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, Mave is responsible whether or not you intend to do the damage or not. Remember that, Mave.
Like when you
man
knock.
was awake or a man was sleeping, you're
Yeah.
responsible. So he didn't intend to injure his fellow, but in that case, he's more culpable because of the fact that he was the first person that set this in motion. But um, um, with regards to damages caused by his body, is liable for both the second person's body and the second person's utensils. So, in other words, if I fell first and as I tripped, I fell back and landed on Kevin's vase, right? Or vase, whatever you like to say, and broke it, in that particular case, I am liable. Fine, that we get. If I land in front of Kevin's feet and he trips over, I'm liable because it's man that causes damage to the second one's property or the second one's person. However, if you have a look, my utensils when I fall, okay, is only responsible when it shatters if it injures Kevin. If it injures Kevin, but not if my utensils damage his utensil. Why? Think about it, guys.
Just say that sentence again.
All right. I'm responsible as the first faller if I damage the second person's utensils or their body. But my utensils, after I've fallen, if it lands on the ground and then Kevin gets injured by it, Kevin will answer now, I'm responsible for my utensils injuring Kevin, but not for my utensils injuring Kevin's utensils or smashing on him. Do you understand? In other words, Kevin trips and then his utensil lands on top of mine and smashes it. I mean, mine smashes his.
Where's Kevin sitting? Behind you or two behind you?
No, he's one behind me. We're just looking at the one
Okay.
effect. Kev, what do you...
I'll try. Is it Gavin? I'll try. Is it because it's like bore?
Exactly. Is that the minute I fell, we learned before, according to Rav Yehuda, excellent, that that if you there's no such concept generally when Rav Yehuda, there was an explanation of Rav Yehuda and there was a discussion with Rabbi Meir, and they were saying that you can't just dig a pit in the public domain and then declare it, there was an opinion ownerless. Does that make sense? And say it's not my problem. Why? Because you created something on purpose and you left it there. If you fell because of somebody else, because of yourself, and then because of that unavoidable accident, not according to Rabbi Meir, but according to Rav Yehuda and the sages, and there was that argument with Rava and Abaya, then in the case of an accidental mishap, you could in that case declare your utensils ownerless. And because you declared your utensils ownerless, you're not responsible for that particular utensil in the public domain. So if you want to hold according to the rabbis, that my responsibility isn't because it was my negligence in falling, like Rabbi Meir, but you want to say according to the sages that it's because of my failure to get up in time, okay? Then it's deemed as an unavoidable mishap, and then any hazard that I've got as an unavoidable mishap, in that case, I can declare it ownerless, and I'm not responsible for the damage it causes, because I never created the hazard. I fell as a result of the hazard. And therefore, my object that damaged, or I dropped the object because I stumbled, or the hand, and therefore, in that case, it's ownerless. So what we're saying is that is one reason of ownerlessness. But the other reason is even according to Shmuel said whether you declared it ownerless or not at the time or whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter. If basically even Rav would agree that utensils in the Kevin, you falling asleep? Mm-hmm. Utensils in the public domain are not covered under bor. In other words, if a human being dies in a pit, you're not responsible for the death portion. You're only responsible between 9 tefachim and 10 tefachim if an animal dies. So there's a penalty if an animal dies if the pit is too deep. If a human being dies, you're not responsible for the kofir payment. You're responsible for the injury portion, but not the kofir payment. Okay? You're not responsible for in bor for utensils that got damaged. Only Rabbi Yehudi says you're responsible for utensils that got damaged in the pit. Right? Except in a case probably of an unavoidable accident where you declare your objects ownerless. That was a discussion. However, the rabbis all say you're not responsible under the category of bor pit for utensils that are damaged. So look at this. I fall. I don't look where I'm going and I fall. So whether it was an accidental mishap or you're holding like Rabbi Meir that I'm responsible, either way, when I fell, my object now that fell next to me has become a hazard. It's become an obstruction in the public domain. And therefore, Kevin is completely right. When it's become a bore in the public domain, if another utensil is damaged by my hazard, I'm not liable for it. Therefore, my utensil that damages Kevin that falls after me, I'm responsible for, because a man that falls in a pit is responsible for his injury, but not if his utensils got damaged in that hazard. Does that make sense? Kevin, well done.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. So the first person is liable for damage your utensils caused to the second person's body, but not for damage that caused to the second person's utensils. That's Rashi's commentary. Very well done, Kevin. Now, let's go on. The second now is liable for damages to the third in the case of damages caused by his body, but not in the case of damages caused by his property. So we're saying, hang on, it might sound similar. We just said that if your property causes damage, you're not liable. How's the second person that damages the third any difference to the first? And we're going to learn one distinction. As the first faller, if my utensil shatters and injures Kevin, or he trips on it, you're liable for injuries your bore creates, your pit creates, your hazard creates. So therefore, my utensils as the first faller are responsible for injuring Kevin. But as the second faller, because I'm deemed less culpable, my utensil isn't even in the category of a bore. It's less. So therefore, what the Gemara is proposing is only if I injure Kevin, am I liable because I'm the hazard, or if I injure Kevin's utensils, I'm liable. Why? Because it's man injuring. So in that particular case, that's fine. But if my utensils even injure Kevin, you don't pay because it's not even seen as a bore where a person gets paid for injuries. It's less. He's less culpable. Why? Because the first person never looked where he was going and he tripped. The second person was tripped by somebody else that fell in front of him. Therefore, it's not deemed as negligence, even according to Rabbi Meir. Does that make sense, Gav? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. But there's a problem here. The Gemara seeks the reason for the distinction. From whichever position you choose to view Rava's teaching, it's problematic. Well, why is it problematic? Because the first person's property is deemed a bor, and the second person's property is not deemed a bor. So Rashi said it does seem problematic. Why? Because, as the Gemara says, if Rava holds that one who stumbled is considered negligent, the second one should also be liable for damages caused by his property because he too stumbled. And if Rava holds that one who stumbles is not considered negligent, even the first one should not be liable. So what it's saying is as follows, is that here seems to be the problem, is that we don't know if Rava holds according to Rabbi Meir or the sages. And amongst the sages is Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda sees stumbling as an unavoidable mishap, meaning even the first guy, not liable for it. So why is he liable? Because Rav Yochanan explains Rabbi Yehuda and the sages as saying his failure to get up in time. That's what caused the liability, or his failure to warn. As Rav Yochanan, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak explains. Does that make sense, guys? That he said, listen, it's the failure to warn. It's not that you didn't get up in time. Even if you couldn't, you should have warned. And then Rav Yochanan said, but how can you warn if you're in a state of preoccupation? But the bottom line of it is, if you could have got up and you didn't, that's your negligence according to the sages. According to Rabbi Meir, the first guy is negligent because he should have watched where he was going. So if Rava holds according to Rabbi Meir, then he's saying, what difference is it with the second one? The first one fell because he didn't watch where he was going. And if the one behind kept a decent following distance and walked at a decent, not such a fast pace, he could have prevented it, because it's also negligence. If you fall, it's either negligence or not. If you're holding according to Rabbi Meir, because you should have looked where you're going. According to the sages, it's an unavoidable mishap. So the question arises, whichever you're holding, if you hold the first part liable, then the second should be liable. If you don't hold the first liable, then the second shouldn't be liable. Does that make sense, guys? So that's exactly the question. So let's just see how it's dealt with. The Gemara explains, Rava holds that the first one is certainly negligent. Hence, he is liable for any damage he causes, whether by his body or his property. Okay? So what we're saying here is Rava maintains that stumbling is considered negligence. So therefore, the first one who stumbled of his own accord is liable not only for the damages caused by his property, in other words, a man that damages, but also for the damages caused by his utensils, because now they've become a hazard in the public domain. So since his utensils came to be an obstacle as a result of his negligence, he is as responsible for them as a bore that he dug. Okay? So Rava disagrees. If you remember back in 29a, Rava disagrees with the buyer, who said that Rabbi Meir and the sages argue as to whether stumbling is considered negligent. Okay? That was Rabbi's opinion, that was a disgusting, that Rabbi Meir considered them negligent and the sages not. Rava's opinion, even the sages regarded stumbling as negligence, and the dispute concerns only the issue of who declared his hazards ownerless. Okay, do you remember what this says? So he's saying it is negligent. But if you declared it ownerless, that was a discussion. Are you responsible or are you not? So this is Rava speaking. So Rava says it is negligence. So what's with regards to the second one? Just quickly. So the second one, however, is liable for damages caused by his body because he should have stood up and he did not stand up. But he is not liable for damage caused by his property because he can say to the third one, he can say to the third guy, I didn't dig this pit. That is, my property became an obstacle through no fault of mine. Meaning, the first guy, he can't say that to the second one because he didn't look where he was going. If the second person tripped over the first, and then his article went in the public domain, he could turn around and say, listen, I never created a public hazard here. We learned before that if I fell in an unavoidable mishap, in that particular case, in other words, I was tripped, my object now is ownerless. It's not even the category of a bore. If it damages you, I'm not even responsible if it damages you because, I'm less culpable. Okay, so the second part is not considered negligent for his fall because he didn't stumble of his own accord. He tripped over an obstacle, either the first person's body or the utensils. So he's not liable for damage caused by his property since it came to be an obstacle as a result of an unavoidable accident. In other words, he can say, I didn't dig this bore. In other words, I never created this hazard in the public domain. Even if he had sufficient time to pick up the utensils, which is unlikely because he's still recovering, he's not accountable for them because we refer to a case in which he declared his utensils ownerless. Because remember, guys, we learned in the 30th daf in Aleph, note 3 in your Schottenstein, the accepted halacha is that one who declares his hazards ownerless after they fell unavoidably, into the public domain is not responsible for them. You must look at that commentary on Rashi. We're not talking about a guy that created a pit. He tripped. And therefore that hazard was unavoidable. Obviously the discussion was before the fall and after. Did he have time to clean it up, etc. but that was the accepted halacha. However, he is liable for damage caused by his body because he had sufficient time to stand up and he didn't do so. So with regards to a person's body, you can't say that you can be released from liability because you've declared your body ownerless. You have to be psychopathic to say, I'm not my body. You are your body. You can declare a third-party article not part of you, but you are your body. Okay? So as far as that's concerned, that's why the second part is obviously less liable. So we're going to see the challenge from this particular ruling. All right. So the Gemara challenges Rava's ruling that the first one is liable for damages caused by his utensils. They challenge this ruling from the following brisa. All of them are liable for damages caused by their body and are not liable for damages caused by their property. So obviously utensils form part of your property. So does this not mean that even the first one is not liable for damages caused by his property, but Rava ruled that the first one is liable for damages caused by his property? Kevin, give it over. Or do you want me to repeat it?
You were so quick there. Sorry, I had to check something. Okay.
Okay, I can see when people aren't in it.
No. I had to just check something quickly.
I need you for a minute.
Yeah. Okay, so...
Arthur, why are you checking your screen? Okay, I can see you now. One, I see ears, and they ain't yours, and they're furry. Yours are furry, but not pointy. All right, let's get started.
Just say it again, Damon. It's about liability there.
All right, so the Gemara challenges Rava's ruling that the first one is liable for damage caused by his utensils. And they challenged his ruling from the following brisa. All of them, this is what the brisa says, all of them are liable for damages caused by their body and are not liable for damages caused by their property. So the question that this brisa is coming to bring is, does this not mean that even the first one is not liable for damages caused by his property, but yet Rava ruled that the first one is liable for damages caused by his property? Do you see what I'm saying? So what they did is they brought a brisa to contradict Rava. So Rava had a ruling that the first one is liable for his property and the damage that his body causes to the second one, okay? But it seems to contradict a brisa. And that brisa says all of them are liable for damage caused by their body and they're not liable for damages caused by their property. So it's saying that basically, how does Rava rule that the first one is liable for damages also to his property? We know the second one isn't liable for damages that his utensils cause, because it can either be deemed that his utensils are ownerless in an unavoidable accident, or it can even be deemed in a case that because he fell, that it's not even considered a bore if his utensils damaged, because it was even less negligence. Either way, how does Rava make the first one culpable for the property? In other words, your utensils or anything that damages. So the Gemara deflects this answer because it uses the word, you're all liable for your bodies and none of you are liable for your property. So how does Rava say that the first one's liable for their property? So the Gemara deflects the challenge. It says, no, when the brisa rules that they're not liable for damage caused by their property, it refers to all of them except the first one. The first one is liable for damage caused by his property, as Rava holds. Now, guys, what do you think the objection to this could be?
Well, because it's a bore. If it's a bore,
No, because it uses the word all of them. If I'm saying to you, Arth, all of you are going to win R1 million, and then Arthur doesn't win the R1 million, Arthur's going to say, but you said all of you would win R1 million. It's inclusive of everyone. So how does the brisa just deflect it and said all of them except the first one? If it's all, it's everybody. If it's not all, then you say the second and third. Why are you saying all of them and you suddenly rubber the brisa deflects and says no, except the first one? You see the question? Yeah. So then the solution is refuted, but the brisa states all of them. Thus, how can you say that it does not refer to the first one? So the Gemara defends its answer. Rav Ada bar Ahava said, When the Brisa says all of them, it means all of the damaged ones. This does not include the first party who was not damaged by anyone else. Okay? Does that make sense? So what would be your argument to that? What would be
The
your
language.
argument to Rav Ada Ba'ahava that said when the Brisa says all of them, it means all of the damaged one? What would be your argument to him? Arthur, do you have a suggestion? Kevin?
Must be more specific. I can't say all of them. It must be all of the damaged parties.
Exactly. Jeez, Kevin.
So also going back, ambiguity you mentioned earlier.
No. That's it. You said it exactly. Kevin's on fire today.
Well done.
So what it's saying is exactly what Kevin says. The Gemara also rejects this explanation. What sort of answer is this? Is it in order for you to say that the Brisa refers even to the first one? For that is why they stated all of them. But if you say that the Brisa refers to all of them except the first one, then what's the point of saying all of them? Why don't you just say the damaged ones? Exactly as Kevin said. Why don't you refer to them as the damaged ones? Meaning they're the ones that were damaged by the other person. Exactly as Kevin said. Kevin, well done, mate. So the Gemara reinterprets Rava's statement in an attempt to reconcile it with the Brisa. Rather, this is what Rava must have meant. The first one is liable for damages caused by his body to the second one, both in the case of damages to the second one's body and in the case of damages to the second one's property. Now, listen carefully to how this actually means. What this is saying is, if the Brisa regards, because what it's saying is that the Brisa regards stumbling as an unavoidable accident. So even the first person isn't responsible for his utensils, since they fell in the street as a result of his stumbling. We learned that last in 30a in the Gemara in 30a, note number 3, guys, by Rashi. The first one is not responsible for his utensils since they fell in the street as a result of his stumbling. So he's nevertheless liable for damages caused by his body. Okay? So the first one is liable for damages of the second, whether for damage of his body or for damages of his property. So it's saying it seems to be a contradiction. If I'm saying that the Brisa is referring to a case of where, because I fell accidentally, I'm not responsible for my utensils and they're declared ownerless because they only created a hazard, because not, as you said, Art, that I dug a pit in the public domain, but it fell in an accident. So then what's this thing about you saying in the beginning, Rava's statement, that you're responsible for what your body causes and what your utensils cause is the first person that's falling? So the reality is we're saying no. It's a possessive noun, meaning I'm not responsible as an accidental mishap for my utensils causing damage, but I'm always responsible, man's always responsible for himself, for me falling and injuring Gavin, or me falling and injuring Gavin's property, but I'm not responsible for my utensils now injuring Gavin. Why? Because according to this interpretation, the utensils themselves are ownerless. So when we say you're responsible for the utensils, we mean of the other person, not that your utensils have responsibility to damage others. So the Brisa is rewritten. In other words, the possessive noun, his and his body and his property, was initially understood to signify the first person, meaning I, as the first person that fell, I'm responsible for my property that damages and for me that damages. But the Brisa has been reworked to say that it meant that the first person is liable by damages caused by his body only, not his property. Okay? And therefore, if my body damages Gavin's property by falling on it, I'm liable for his property and his body if my body causes injury, but not if my property damages because I fell in an unavoidable accident. That's the tweak here brought in this Brisa. I still find it very difficult because in the discussion before, Rava deems the same as Rabbi Meir, and he says the sages generally say that you're responsible for negligence if you fell. So this interpretation of the Brisa I don't quite understand. So according to this interpretation, Rava does not specify the source of the damage. He means that the first person is only liable for damage caused by his body to both another person's body and utensils, and is not liable at all for damage caused by his property. Okay, that's how it seems to be reconciled. All right. So the Gemara reinterprets Rava's statement in an attempt to reconcile the Brisa. Okay. Rather, this is what Rava must have meant. The first one is liable for damages caused by his body to the second one, both in the case of damages to the second one's body and in the case of damages to the second one's property. The second one is liable for damages to the third one in the case of damages to the third one's body, but not in the case of damages to the third one's property. Meaning, even if in this particular case, as the second one, I fell over Gavin, and my body causes damage to Arthur's, as the third one, his property, I'm not liable, because in this case, man is halachically seen as a bore, as a pit. Why? Because he became the hazard. And therefore, any utensils damaged in a hazard, you're not liable for, because there's less responsibility. I fell over Gavin, and therefore, when I tripped Arthur, then I'm responsible for hurting Arthur, but not his utensils, because it's as if his utensils were damaged in a bore, because I've become a hazard since I fell, and I'm less culpable, right? So that makes sense. But there's a slight problem here, and we'll find it now. The second one is liable for damages to the third one in the case of damages to the third one's body, but not in the case of the damages to the third one's property. Why is the second one not liable for damages to the third one's property? The reason is that the second one's body is classified under the category of pit, and we do not find an instance of a pit where the Torah holds the owner liable for damage to utensils. Okay, so now we're going to find a problem. What's the problem to that? Is that basically, if we rule according to Shmuel, this is understandable. Why is it understandable? Because Shmuel said whether a property, a bore, your pit, is ownerless or it's your possession, you're liable for the damages, but not to utensils. Are you with me? Because in other words, a bore. In other words, I leave my cell phone in the public domain. I haven't given up ownership. Okay? If Kevin slips on it and damages his person and smashes his vase as a result, I have to pay for injuries to Kevin, but not for the injuries to the vase, because anything damaged in a bore, you're not liable for utensils except according to Rav Yehuda. So we find with Shmuel, okay? Because whether you own it or you don't own it, that's fine. That makes sense, right? So we're saying a person, that makes sense, but it doesn't make sense according to Rav, not Rava, Rav. Because Rav said that something that's ownerless, you're not responsible for under the category of shore, you're responsible under the category of bore. Meaning, if I created a pit in the public domain, and since I created a pit in the public domain, and it damages, I'm not responsible for damage due to utensils. But if I haven't given ownership of that hazard, like I leave a cell phone in the public domain and I still want that cell phone, that would be under the category, according to Rav, as a shore, as my property damaging. And therefore, I'm responsible if my cow or ox damages utensils. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So therefore, if I'm responsible, if my cow stands on Arthur's jug, I have to pay for that, whether under the laws of caring, because it smashes it and kicks it in temper, or whether it's a case of regal and it stands on it, or it starts to eat his rucksack bag, I'm responsible for it, because that's my property. But I'm not responsible if Arthur fell into my pit and his utensils were damaged, because that pit is ownerless. Nobody says that's my pit and I'm so proud of creating that hazard. There's no emotional attachment. It's not like an object you want. So therefore, why is there a problem with this with Rav? is because if the second person fell over the first and now his body becomes a hazard in the public domain, and now he's classified as a hazard, as a bore, it's fine according to Shmuel, because we can say that, fine, I'm not responsible if, as the second party falling, I damage Kevin's utensils, because you're not responsible for utensils if a bore damages it in the public domain, right? But it's a problem according to Rav, who said that a person's sure property, you're responsible if it damages because it's yours. So you can never create your body to be ownerless. This is the problem. Because you can create something that you have like a utensil or your property that damages something else and say that's ownerless. You can detach from your responsibility in an unavoidable accident, but you can't detach from your own body and say, I'm ownerless of my body. So therefore, a person's body, according to Rav, can never be declared a bore, because you can't make your body ownerless. And therefore, if it's not ownerless, it would go under the category of a shore, which means you're responsible for damaging somebody else's utensils as the second party if you damage the third person's utensils. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. So since that is the case, so we've come almost to the end. If this is the case, it says, what is there to say? The second person obviously did not declare his body ownerless. Therefore, according to Rav, how can it be deemed a pit? Okay? In light of this difficulty, the Gemara reverts to its original interpretation of Rav's ruling. So what was his original interpretation? Because it's not that Rav has changed his mind, it's that there were two people interpreting Rav. The original correct interpretation of Rav's ruling, as stated initially, is that the first potter is liable for damage caused by his body and his property, while the second party is only liable for damage caused by his body. So what it's saying is that he can't declare his property as the first faller ownerless, because he holds that even the sages, not just Rabbi Meir, says that you basically liable for falling as negligence. And therefore, if you fall as negligence, your property is also responsible if it injures the second person that fell. But you wouldn't be responsible if as the first faller, my property injured Kevin's property, because that means my property has become a hazard, and you're not responsible for other people's utensils if they fall into the hazard. So again, as the first faller, I'm responsible for my body if it injures Kevin's body or it injures his property as the one that fell on me. Okay? But my property is only responsible as the first faller if it injured Kevin, but not if it damaged his property, because that's seen as a hazard, a bore, and bores are not responsible for utensils that they damage. Okay? So, in fact, and as for the problem that you had that was based on the brisa that said all of them are liable for damage caused by their body, but not damage caused by their property, how do you resolve it? Rav Ada by Manyumis interpreted the brisa before Ravina as referring to a case where utensils were damaged by utensils. That is, when the brisa said that one is not liable for damage caused by his utensils, it only refers to damage caused by his utensils to other utensils. In other words, it's not saying I'm not responsible when I fell for my utensil injuring the person behind me, but my utensil now has become a bore, and therefore, because it's a pit, I'm not responsible for other utensils that get damaged in a pit. That's how we reconcile that brisa that says, for the body you liable. In other words, if my utensils damage your body, I'm liable, but I'm not liable if I damage your utensils. That's how it's interpreted. So, the master stated in the brisa, this was the last sentence, guys. If they both, the second and the third one, fell because of the first one is liable to damages to all of them. That's how that statement is damages all of them is explained. What does that mean? How is it possible that the third one could have fallen before the first? So basically, Rav Papa said where he blocked the road like a carcass. What did he mean? The first guy didn't fall and the second one fell on top of him. He fell like sprawled across the road. And the second one fell, and the third one, to avoid the second one, actually tripped on the first one on the ground. So therefore, it's like tempen bowling. The first one managed to knock the other two. So Rav Zavid said it speaks of a case where he blocked the road like a staff of a blind man, meaning like a blind man's got a staff across the road, and anybody that would fall over that staff would be liable because it's sprawled. It's the same thing, Rav Zavid and Rav Papa. The only difference is there's some halachic difference according to Tosfot, which we're not going to get into. We have finished everything, guys. I want Kevin to teach us. In 10 minutes, we're going on
everything. What do you mean everything? You see what you just said of this. You see, you're specific. Correct. Everything means the whole Masechta.
Yeah, wishful thinking that we finished, but we haven't yet. Kevin, teach us, and then we're all going to go onto the link directly with Stephen.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Let's go here. Okay. I'm just going to do random stuff from day to day. It's not going to be an instant. Okay. So the first thing is commencement of Shabbos. Okay, in honor of the Shabbos, it's a mitzvah to prepare oneself by cleaning one's clothes, taking a bath or shower, washing one's hair, and cutting one's nails. Some men actually go to a mikveh before Shabbos. And then, so Shabbos commences 15 to 8 minutes before sunset on Friday, which is what's called Shkia. In Jerusalem, the practice is to commence 40 minutes before sunset, not 15 to 18, as we are accustomed to. It ends at nightfall on Saturday night. Exact times are usually published in the community calendar. One may begin Shabbos earlier than prescribed, but not before Plaga Mincha. It's 1 1.25 seasonal hours before sunset. A seasonal hour is half of a daylight hour. Is 1/12 of a daylight hour. So one would have to do a whole calculation, which we won't have time today. If you really want to bring it early, then you will need to do your maths. Okay. When the local shul starts the Friday evening service earlier than the official time stipulated by the calendar, a common practice during the summer, when sunset is late, one should kindle lights before Baruch Hu. Before Baruch Hu is recited by one's community, and observe Shabbos before that time. They do in Israel, a lot of shuls here in summer have like what they call early Shabbos. Because of the height of summer, it can come in at 8:30, and people go to early minyan, and they do their meal, and then sometimes go to Mariv later. Or they do the Shabbos. You can do the Shabbos service early, but you just have to repeat the Shema, because the Shema has to be said at the right time to fulfill the mitzvah. So they do that in Israel. Arthur, you're probably in Ranana, that happens too. I'm sure you may be aware of that. So you can do early Shabbos just for like family, just so that the kids, by the time you finish, before you know it's going to be 10:10, and you haven't even finished the meal, the kids are exhausted, as are some of the parents. So
that's why they have a community one, because in South Africa it's 6:15, but now because of the virus, because of COVID, they have two minyans. They have one so for Friday evening Kabbalat Shabbat. I don't understand how they can do this, but I think it's based on what you're telling us now, is that they start like about an hour before. They finish when I arrive. So when I arrived the other day, I was a few minutes late. Everybody was coming out, and I didn't know what was going on. So I thought I was late for sure. I wasn't.
If the community does it, then you can do it that way, Damon. You can't do that on your own. No, you can't bring Shabbos on your own, unaccorded earlier. If you're doing it in a shul, it's part of a community, then you can do it.
Part of it, yeah. But I don't understand how they're doing Ma'ariv before Ma'ariv time.
That's okay. You can do that, but you must then repeat the Shema at the correct time, because you don't get the mitzvah of saying the Shema